The Sunday school lesson for November 3rd, 2024 is Confidence in God's Shepherding, Psalm 23, verses 1 through 2. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. The first verse introduces a reversal. Whereas David had been a shepherd himself, Psalm 78, verses 70 through 72, God is David's shepherd. The metaphor of God as a shepherd is frequently used by Old Testament writers. Thus, the psalm is spoken or sung by an individual sheep of the metaphor. It would be strange for a shepherd to care for only one sheep. The psalmist does not feel the need to tell of any others. He focuses on the relationship between one sheep himself and the shepherd. David was familiar with the role of shepherd, and he understood the great responsibility of providing for the needs of a flock. As domesticated animals, sheep are less able to provide for their own needs. However good David may have been as a shepherd in meeting those needs, the psalmist depicts God to be all the more mindful in that regard. This confidence is evident in the phrase, I lack nothing. Whatever need may arise for the speaker, God is ready and able to meet this need. A good shepherd will do this, but a bad shepherd will be far away when need arises. God is not distant. In 2a, the phrase green pastures reflects an image of ideal summertime abundance in the land of Canaan. But such abundance can be hit and miss in its semi arid climate as it experiences little or no rainfall for 5 months of the year. Shepherds constantly had to scout the best locations for grazing sheep. Makes me lie down reveals the causative force of the Hebrew verb. Sheep are at ease as they provided rest along their food. In 2b, while sheep have the ability to survive without water for up to 7 days, they are likely to consume a significant amount when the opportunity arises. The imagery of quiet waters is unusual, since the flowing water of a river or stream is the preferred image for needs that are met. At least two interpretations of quiet waters have been proposed. One reading holds that the shepherd brings the flock to a natural body of water free of fast flowing rapids, hence quiet. A difficulty for this interpretation is that the shepherds tended to rely on whales to water flocks, Genesis 29 1 through 8. Moreover, fast flowing water was not common in this land. Another way of understanding the image is to take the word quiet, a noun in the original language, to refer to a place of rest. This is a frequent translation of this word elsewhere. It reinforces the image of a place where sheep feel free to lie down unthreatened. Whichever interpretation most accurately conveys the psalmist's intended imagery, the central message remains that the shepherd leads the sheep instead of driving them. This presents a picture of tender direction, as depicted in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 11. Furthermore, this picture is deeply rooted in the theology of the Exodus, when God guided the Israelites through the wilderness. Exodus chapter 13, verses 21 through 22. Verses 3 through 4. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. In 3a, the psalmist is calm and untroubled as God's provision for physical needs coincides with God's provision for non physical needs. The same thought, using the exact two Hebrew words translated refreshes and soul, appears in Psalms 19 and 7, 116 and 7, Proverbs 25 and 13, and others. Many Psalms plead for God's restoring favor. In 3b, the imagery of shepherding continues. One way of thinking about God's leading the right paths is to imagine forks on the side road of on the road of life. When a fork is encountered, one must choose which way is the right one. But we should not miss a distinction between the closely related words righteous and righteousness. We can do no better than listen to the Apostle John on this point. If you know that he is righteous, you know that everyone who does what is right has been born of him. Dear children, do not let anyone lead you astray. The one who does what is righteous, just as he is righteous. A faithful or religious shepherd, as God is, leads the faithful of the flock into right paths. God proves to be faithful. It is not in his nature to be otherwise. In 4a, the psalmist continues by now emphasizing the protection side of God's shepherding. We would all prefer that there would be no more dark valleys of life. Nevertheless, there are, and there will be until Jesus returns. There is no promise that the Christian will not have to endure such valleys, quite the opposite. But we do indeed have a promise of God's presence. The presence of God should signal the absence of fear. Fear is a God given emotion that helps protect us. When our fear is justified because of real and imminent danger, it can save our life. Fear can be related to evil in several ways. First, a person might fear neither evil nor God because he or she has embraced evil. Psalm 36, verses 1 through 4. Second, a godly person can fear evil by deciding to avoid it because getting too close to it runs the danger of falling into its clutches. Third, a godly person doesn't fear evil because he or she knows that God's presence is stronger than any evil that may lie in the path. Rod and staff are tools of the shepherd. The Hebrew word that is translated rod also can take the sense of a scepter, a sign of authority. Psalm 45 and 6, that might be used to inflict pain or punishment. The word translated staff refers more to a walking stick or a cane. The psalmist is comforted by the fact that God has these metaphorical tools at his disposal. Verses 5 through 6. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. In 5a, with a new verse comes a change in metaphor. Sheep do not dine at tables, so the shepherd's imagery seems to have given way to something new. God is now depicted as a gracious host who has prepared a fine meal for the psalmist to enjoy. This could signify a role reversal for King David, since kings were known to have splendid tables to feed many people. Preparation in the presence of my enemies could be intended to make these enemies jealous, or simply to show that God was not hiding the display of his favor. Because of God's protection and provision, they can do nothing to harm the psalmist. The verse just prior to this one bridges the two images. In verse 4, the psalmist spoke of a death-defying journey through shadowy places, and now he imagines a feast for himself, the weary traveler. Roads and mountain paths were dangerous in ancient times. Much later, under Roman rule, when roads had greater security for travelers, Jesus still would speak of thieves on the road between Jerusalem and Jericho. Enemies on the road were a danger for all travelers. It is impossible to say whether the psalmist has particular enemies in mind, perhaps the literal foes of David. His anointing as king made several enemies, not the least of which was his predecessor, King Saul. A related text refers to a time when David was in the desert of Judah, and it speaks of enemies seeking his life. In verse 5b, the host honors the guest by anointing his head with oil. Given the fragrances that were available to add to olive oil, such anointing is a soothing and refreshing experience for a weary traveler. This anointing was done for Jesus when Simon the Pharisee hosted him for dinner, an intentional oversight noted by Jesus. The psalmist possibly intends a double meaning. He may be recognizing David's physical anointing to be king over Israel, while acknowledging God's continual anointing in spirit. The latter projects are image of God as a hospitable host, with all the trappings of a grand meal involved. Such pouring oil happen in various contexts. The image fits both. In 5c, the psalmist continues to acknowledge God's benevolence as host. Presumably, the host has given the guest a large cup of wine, and the guest is satisfied. The Hebrew word translated overflows occurs elsewhere only in Psalm 66, verse 12. There, it is translated place of abundance in the context of being rescued by God. This cup of satisfaction is equivalent to the waters of Psalm 23 2b. The text has twice mentioned hardship, dangers in the dark valley, and enemies in sight of the host's table. If the psalmist feels that he is being chased by death and evil, then he imagines that God's goodness and love will pursue him all the more. It's insightful into God's character to see how the two Hebrew words translated as goodness and love are paired in other passages. In 6b, the final line provides a fitting conclusion for the psalm as it vividly depicts nearness to God. The psalmist shared a table with God and expected to remain forever. He did not expect to be shown the door. A house for any god in the ancient Near East was a temple, but in David's lifetime, God had no temple, and he denied permission for David to build one for him. 2 Samuel chapter 7 verses 1 through 7. This fact of history points to the house of the Lord being the heavenly dwelling. Thank you so very much for listening. And remember, every Sunday at 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, I release a new video for the upcoming Sunday school lesson. Stay safe and may God bless.